The Aran Islands, Inishmore, Inishman and Inishir. 3 giant leaves of rock, as though floating in the Atlantic Ocean, off the Clare and Galway coast. These are scenes many of us are familiar with as visitors. But beyond the islands as a tourist destination lie an ancient historic culture, now all but covered over by the predations of life in the 21st century. I'm about to visit the islands to show for the first time some unique film taken in the early 1960s by my father, Ruari Ó Síocháin, film that has never been shown in public before, and to meet some of the people he photographed some 40 years earlier. My father, a newspaperman with the Irish Times in the 1930s, then later a successful lawyer, had become deeply attached to the islands in the late 1940s, when he went to teach himself fluency in the island Gaelic, that is still the first language of the people here. He was later to set up the first ever audiolingual Irish language school in Dublin. He wrote a book on the islands, Aran Islands of Legend, still in print, and then introduced the Aran sweater to the world's markets. But also, in the early 1960s, he bought himself a Bolex cinecamera and made what was an early prototype corporate video, filming unique footage of life on the islands, a life that neither he nor the islanders could have known was on the cusp of such a great change. I am met on Inisheer by Dara O'Connella, writer, poet and keeper of a museum of island life here. At his house we will meet his wife Pachella and daughter Lasarina, whose voice we now hear singing.
Na wina silta rum polomor O chono gudjoe martin Ula shis gatalabon O chon gudjoe martin Ula gismo talamon Snart vil ni bwyl ryd festa In tjata gachnach ein hyn Slachte, ich lachte, slachte Ein akkel in ur chanive O chano gudjoe martin Ula shis gatalabon O chon gudjoe martin Ula gismo corges anamon Gur fall til vagus fall til vor Rif chursen I tilte is chilach Itan shinte ter siet galach As bel chele ilori shau O chano gudjoe martin Ula shis gatalabon O chon gudjoe martin Ula gismo corges anamon.
Ruari Ó.
on my father's first bit of film that there's some beautiful singing, which I believe is a relation of yours, isn't it?
That's right. That's my mother's sister, Nora.
Yes.
Nora.
So is it grand aunt then of Lasarine
She'd be my
here?
grand-aunt,
Yeah,
yes.
and Lasarine, by maybe that for no coincidence, you're a professional singer.
Yeah.
And you sing internationally now, which is amazing. That from a time when the islands were so isolated here now that a few generations on, you're singing next week in Paris, I believe.
Yeah, I'll be doing some recordings, singing in French.
Eric Satie music,
Yes.
which is shows the distance that the island has come.
Oh yeah.
What I did find though were old outtakes of the film, which I've put together. These are they're not edited, but they're small little bits and pieces that I've actually put together and now I've put onto a videotape, which I want to show to the islanders tonight. Again, they show much of the island life there in ways that now certainly is long gone. I flew out this morning. It took me 10 minutes. In those days, I would have to be overnight in Galway, take the early boat. There was the Dunangus first and later the Nevana. And it was, 3.5 hours?
You were lucky if you came up straight.
Because you visit the other islands, Inishmore and Inishmaan first and then
go
here.
to America then.
And then there was the other thing, which for me was a great adventure as a kid. You had to get off the Dunangus into a curragh and be rowed ashore. As a small boy, they would put me in the front of the boat and you'd huddle there and the water would be spraying over as they were rowing into the waves. But between, that's all between you and the Atlantic Ocean is quite often, it's just this little layer of tar and canvas. And now I think it would make me nervous, but as a small boy I thought this was a wonderful adventure. Another interesting part of looking through the old bits of film that I was putting together was to see the shots of my father every so often come up, and some surprising shots lighting a cigarette for somebody on the Nevana for a tourist, and my father who never smoked, for me looking back, wow. And then there's a lovely shot of him drinking a pint of Guinness. But my father, well, he would hardly ever have a drink, but here he is quaffing back a full pint of Guinness. So it was lovely for me to be able to come across these old images and see another side of him, sort of a more side that now I understand. Waiting on the beach for the twice-weekly ferryboat was a central event of island life. The upturned walking boat is often seen as a classic symbol of the islands. Here we see the boatyard where the curraghs were built, their prows fashioned high to ride the heavy Atlantic swell. This is the skeleton of a curragh before the canvas and tar have been applied. With the pier yet to be extended, all goods, people and animals had to be transported to and from the ferry steamer by curragh. Sometimes this took a lot of hands. The loading and unloading could be dangerous work, even in moderate seas. Nobody could expect to arrive with dry feet. The ever-present donkeys were invaluable as transport, carrying their loads through the deep sand and up to the island cottages. It's hard to imagine that these scenes were recorded when the Beatles were already well established in the music charts. The islanders were capable of being virtually self-sufficient, making cowhide shoes called pamputis, weaving and knitting their own clothes, harvesting and threshing grain, and most important, gathering the seaweed to be cured and mixed with sand to make the potato drills built on the rock-based fields. But the one necessity that they had to bring in from the mainland was fuel, turf from the bogs of Connemara, carried by the majestic, wide-beamed Galway Bay hookers, so evocative in their red, dun-coloured sails. The turf would be offloaded by hand onto the pier. An empty hooker, light in the water, heads back for the Galway coast. I first came here as a small boy with my father. I think it was 1956 or so. We camped over there under the castle, on the shelter of the cliff, and we were the first ever people to camp as holiday makers, as tourists on the island. They told us later that they thought we were the travellers. Now Tinkerry, who were before the only people who had come in tents, and but we came with my sister and brother and father and myself, and which was an absolutely marvellous experience for a small boy. This was a whole paradise to play in, with this fabulous beach in front of us. None of these houses existed then. This was all like open space.
Yeah.
And so all this behind those buildings there was all sand dunes. So the actual beach effect is a lot smaller than it was in those days, because in my father's film we can see that the beach seems like far bigger, and in actual fact it was, because it spread back to all those dunes.
It is.
Yes, the graveyard in the distance. It's part of an old, very ancient site as well.
Early Christian.
Yeah, well, early Christian then, yes,
okay. Then there's St. Cuivant, then it's supposed to be built in the 10th century, the present church that you see there. And when that was built, as you can see, the church now is below the sand.
Yes.
But when it was built first, it was on level ground.
There's some lovely shots of that where it is still half covered in sand. My father was always thinking of ways to develop the islanders' self-sufficiency. He helped set up lobster fishing and pot making, organised the making of small model curraghs, seen here being made by Sean O'Sharry, still hale and hearty 40 years later. But it was with the Aran sweater he hit major success. In the year that the Irish government set up the Irish Export Board, he went to them with the idea. They took the chance, paid his fare to New York, where he got his first order from the then famous Phil's Men's Shop. With his irrepressible enthusiasm for all things Aran, he was a spellbinding salesman, and he soon had sold to all the majors, Saks Fifth Avenue, Bergdorf's, Barney's, and years later achieved similar success in a far more difficult market, Japan, where he became well known and loved in the last decades of his life. I'm visiting Breed. Breed, who is Breed Og, her mother was the very first manageress my father ever had on the islands in the 1950s. And now the other Breed, her daughter, is still working with organising the hand knitting on the islands.
Lenny to it, no more.
Yeah.
Lenny to it.
Okay, hey,
It's like a stranger,
yeah.
near teenager.
Well, had you
Blonde,
foster trouwens.
That's that had been a him. Tá ahru anad mór amas ach níl mar an ahru de bhatha.
O fi me labra fúvars me gal rocha sier. O casu cailin o caram si blana bocus clay. Vi si chojas an oile se rosa vina hai. Se hamolenga mes tu postes tu nanere from chri. Ata se lua galora gynne wachlin o jersi. Gomane moet spresen oi keske kerem sport gaan king. A town nam se go hochelle banchen overwee. Is ta mische o galore leschen sport gaan king. Gomoe stache dagen alles aan no him with cheese. Vi finnes brander barda gynnes mische vi gorinch.
Now in summer, these same roads fill with tourists and youngsters going to Gaelscoil to learn the island Gaelic. But there are still some who remember both days. I am standing with Maureen O'Gonal on Inishmaan, with her daughters and grandchildren, one of whom, also Maureen, has returned home from the United States for the summer. Maureen, who we see here in her younger days, was my father's manageress on Inishmaan. She is renowned for her artistic skills with needles and wool.
Kennishin Kelly.
Tamishi kepa go tú héna bhórin.
Mr. May. Smay frisher Martha cosú leis an picture o Tam Hain.
Stú?
Smay.
Agus Maureen Michael. An bhéan atá pósta ag céar an ó chuig línis sinní an atá cnistelin
Sinna mishe. Oh, Martha picture am hain cean gan na cíine bhí an fada bhfuil me beagán. Ó, tá Maureen Michael mar a chéile gúna.
Fiochan na brógan léir.
Agus sé sin go hála, go teann sin.
Jesse and Luption so large, yeah, competition la fada bhfuil me ní
Question fantastic.
Scoil of acclamation in Yancy.
An yen tusa féin, an gansi bhfuil
Rinne.
tusa féin sin dó.
Rinne.
Se a bheadh sé sin timpeall an am a bhí sé ghéanamh an scanán seid.
Duna ítach a lí benach
Nar nach ra aine eile ag ghéanamh an isnínte.
Rinne lan mar. Bhí am há tí fada cnitte agus. Bhíon teirigh ag tastalinn san
Sure,
sin,
sure,
bhfuil
well,
mar ní
sin-
ra aon saoú le fálaigh nam ná ag an am, ní ra siad go amach gobar ná.
Níor bhéin
Ní ra aon rud.
Rinne sé gan ag an fápa cem bliana bhfuil.
Ní sé cochtú hín.
Se bhí turas a gal anón ó bhhaile go dtíon róg agus bhí sé a castal se bápa agus déarúgus speisialtar a gensaí an asáin, gensaí áranna dhéanana an fápa. A chuna dhé sin fu mu litir a ríis mu chéan an róh ón bápa agus bhí sé ráte gur cha sé an gensaí na a bhí sé cí.
Ag cí?
Se?
Na písí na crispels gatan na
Bhí sé na
trousers come sús, Tá ceann
Bhí sé go hálainn.
Se.
Ceapam héine, inis ní go rinne mé héine sin a ceapam gur obair an sésaí an féadúireacht sin. Ní ceapam go
Ní léana na sanne lena sinna nach chu héin. Ceimar deanna éolalam an saoir se mar ní mu ggéar an tradiisiún na scíile má fan ceir gona bheanna dhéanana mar is mór a troie.
Se agus tá bíon tú gcóí in Stáit
Tá me chuna i America le sé blianana déag agus tá mar as America agus tá na beirs fáistí ach
cé part America?
Conan muid Salem, New Hampshire.
Agus bí tá cean go fóil a gat ar na heán.
Agus be go deo, tu go me bailile gúna iad an áte agus meile chola blianta go manála heráhí agus tu na páistí ná. Agus is meile buontacha.
An féidir le páistí a chud scéalga láirt?
Tá lára an an beag an na láir seach tigintí cho lecail. Níl me na íorránis na tigintí agus tásúlan fa dhéar an saoir go me se blasta go mai hacha agus ag fiú na frisin.
Gur maith goibh go léir le teacht anach tá druchaí tá ambuíoch. Mise Ruari Ó Síocháin, Wach Padraig Ó Síocháin, agus tá anseo ar an Ileán gan tuas agus críoch a chur ar scanán a dhéim áthair ar na Ileán seo na Saskatchewan. Finally, the special moment has arrived. The first ever public showing of my father's film and the outtakes in the local hall which we have been given for the evening. The hall is full despite the persistent rain that drives in from the Atlantic. Enjoy
Aran, Islands of Legend, Islands of the Atlantic, on Europe's most westerly coast. They are the remnants of an Atlantis lost under the waves 2,000 odd years ago. They are old in prehistory. The only way to these islands is by the tarred canvas boats called curraghs, themselves old as prehistory in their form and construction. The islands of Aran lie 30 miles out from Galway city. A special ferry steamer, the Nevena, St. Anna, calls twice weekly, weather permitting. At times when the weather is not good, the ferry cannot anchor offshore. It must steam out a mile or two offshore, then drift in broadside, and the curraghs come along under the lee. We are at Inisheer, the loveliest island off the western coast of Europe. Prehistory is here in stone, in dune and temple and tower. Strangest of all the world's monuments, these great cyclopean dry stone fortresses are unique, to be found nowhere else in the world, over 2,500 years old. The Aran people lived close to old realities. Boys wear girls' clothes in early years to save them from the She, the fairies, who steal male children. Inishmaan is John Millington Synge's island, where he spent those magic formative years when he was young, where he grew to love the wildness of the weather and the strange depths of the age-old culture and learning and character of his people. Today, it is early autumn. An island girl back in holidays from the United States is now returning with her young family. Their grandparents are at the slip to see them off. So many Aran people live in America. The islands belong there. So intimate has been the connection. Boston, they say, is the capital city of Aran, and you will hear the rich Gaelic of Aran at any time there. Life for the island people is full. Hard at times, the men are fishermen, farmers, general handymen, competent, fearless, but respecting the sea above all else. They never go into conflict with the Atlantic. Their cattle, sheep, and pigs are bred and sold on the mainland markets.
خبرونا خوي مشن نور داغ ميمبال أغسطس مسلان لاتس يلرن مغرا كيغريخ مي وسوغخ أب جارخ مهولة سمه سكارة هون تشيرود نخذكت غبراخ Eges gara go brach lekrik agus glanta agus cair gas a chargui nach a veke meris Eges gara go jojo leis na cardi bodilse o hiel charja mage Ruari Snach menig jairich grian lan rochna spera Snach menig volchi fuiski nadan O dag mission lashut ma varin illerin Agus chwame har sale chanan chishanum Ach a fosum mo Christe ta quivne elasa majin non is lechitim nahi Is a maishlin erish be magun imahasa a charegi aramoge ruachan alish na Willinson.
Temple Nashat Mikri, the Church of the Seven Kings' Sons, one of the earliest of Christian churches, overlooked by the new modern church recently built to replace a church in use for more than 1,000 years. At the highest point on the cliffs of Inishmaan, Singh built this stone shelter, called by the islanders Keir Sink. The vast and glorious panorama of Connemara lay before him some 15 miles away across the waters of Galway Bay. At his side, the great Atlantic rollers surged up the cliff face, even on a quiet day. All this he was to translate into the classic books of world fame. The wild beauty of this island on a hard day he wove into drama. He saw the swing of an island woman's multicolored shawl in the spray that shot up hundreds of feet over the cliff to sweep down the cragga, the bare, broken, rocky waste. Here you see some of the island's knitters in their natural dress. With their age-old culture, these women have an exquisite sense of color harmony and design. A culture thousands of years old, linked with the Latine art period of pre-Roman Europe, as the Celts were the world's greatest craftsmen in gold and silver and enamels, and loved and created fine clothes, which their warriors discarded before going into battle. Here the bridegroom does not wait at the church for the bride, who is invariably late. He goes up to her home, attended by all his close relatives, and literally takes her away from it to his own home, stopping at the church on the way to get married. Custom then forbids the bride's return to her old home for 1 full month. Cuaich na Misa, the month's visit, is the occasion for another wedding feast, this time amongst the immediate relatives. One of the greatest of the 7 existing dunes, Dún Conor measures in diameter 227 feet from north to south and 115 feet from east to west. Nearest to us are the remains of the great stone buildings which were the quarters of the garrison. Of the great outer walls, at least 2 have since disappeared, the stones having long ago been used by the islanders to build their houses. The women of Aran have many skills. Besides being knitters, they are tailors, housewives, farmers' wives, fishermen's wives, fish curers, bakers of bread on the turf fires. No soil on the islands, the fields have been made by hand. 6 inches of soil covers the solid rock, created over the centuries of seaweed and sand. Today, government grants enable the islanders to create new fields, building walls to enclose them, after which they will cover them with this homemade soil, using seaweed as their manure. We set out for the other island, the main island of Inishmore, preparing to journey by curragh. The ferry steamer, having visited the two smaller islands, now goes to the main island to berth at the only pier in the sheltered bay of Killarney. People come here from many parts to see the greatest single collection of pagan and Christian monuments in one place in the world. Dunangus has been referred to as the eighth wonder of the world. It is in itself an incredible monument. It covers over 11 acres, enclosed by two great outer walls. At this point, the cliff is 279 feet high. Paul the Bashed, the serpent's hole, a natural pool where legend has it that a great sea monster once lived. We see Gert na Gopal, the birthplace of Liam O'Flaherty, the great classic writer of the short story in both English and Irish. The story has it that this church was built from the stones of a dune given to the saint by the local chieftain. On one gable end is a remarkable stone bearing a horse carving going back for thousands of years. There are two different eras in this church, one the very early and the second the Norman. On Aran, all the beauty lies looking out from within. Across Galway Bay, we see the famous 12 pins of Connemara. From the highest point of Aran, the view stretches 90 miles to the north, to Mayo and Cropatrick, and 90 miles to the south, to Mount Brandon and to the Kerry coast. The Seach Diomple, the seven churches. The Church of St. Brecon, one of the great monastic settlements of Aran, that escaped the Cromwellian destruction. It lies in the shadow of Dún Ónachta, one of the old pagan forts. Jean Paul, St. Paul's Church, is one of the early Christian churches. St. Benan's Church. This is the smallest of the island churches and one of the smallest churches known. Killarney, this was the ancient port of Aran. Here, St. Anna had established his great monastic settlement. Unhappily, it was utterly destroyed by the Cromwellian soldiers who used the stones to build the great castle of Aachen, the ruins of which now lie beside the small pier of Killarney.
These days, the Aran Islands exist and thrive on a local and international scale. 40 years ago, it was a different world. My father, uniquely, had the vision to record that world. As I am leaving the islands, I come across a curious and happy coincidence. Just arriving on the plane I will fly out on is Ruari Ó Síocháin, whose wedding of 40 years ago we have just witnessed on film.
What's on Samu? I'll start touching. I'll fucking check a rewa being to excuse to be in chakras to go hauling.
Yeah, could have made a maggot.
So to our has on go hush me. It's coincidence my there to go up to our net to make them Willem Shake Hogan's.
Yeah, could have made a maggot.
Okay.
Yeah, could have made a maggot.
Could have made a maggot. So just go fish me.
And I am able to leave the island with an even better sense of the story having come full circle.